Thanks everybody for being here. Thanks Joe Kashi for joining us. My name is Matt Johnson. I serve on the board of the Alaska Photographic Center. Welcome to our Photo Tuesday virtual artist talk. In a moment, I'll be introducing this month's presenter, Joe Kashi. But first want to remind everyone that Rarefied Light 2022 call for entry is open. This year's juror is Dan Burkholder. The deadline for entries is June 7th. The public lecture will be on July 7th, and the 3-day workshop will be July 8th, 9th, and 10th. The venue for both of those events is to be determined. And then in addition, this year, in addition to traveling from Anchorage to Fairbanks to Kenai, Rarefied Light 2022 will also be shown in Valdez. All right, well, Joe Kashi is our guest presenter this month. Joe is a trial lawyer in Soldotna. He moved to Soldotna from Washington, D.C. in 1977. He received a Bachelor of Science degree and a Master degree at MIT in 1996.
73, Matt.
Oh, okay. I stand corrected.
I wish I was that young, but I'm not.
Okay, gotcha. All righty. I can't read my own writing. Joe dabbled in photography while at MIT, taking classes with Minor White. He also wrote for the New York Times and Newsweek. The demands of practicing law in Soldotna led Joe to take a 20-year break from photography. He resumed his photo practice in 2006. Since then, Joe has mounted 26 solo exhibits in Alaska and has participated in numerous Rarefied Light group shows. Joe believes that an image's photographic journey is not complete until an exhibition-ready print is hanging somewhere. So with that, I'd like to introduce today's guest lecturer, Joe Kashi.
Well, hey, thank you, Matt, and thanks everybody. I'll try to be fairly brief, which I am told is a real accomplishment for me. Along the way, back in 2006, my spouse, who is actually a psychologist with training at a concert piano performance level, encouraged me to resume doing some photographic work. Little, of course, do any of us know to avoid, be careful what you wish for. It might happen. But I really want to thank my wife, Therese Kashi, for all of her help, her support, and her encouragement along the way, along with Steve Godfrey at UAA, Cam Choi at Kenai Peninsula College, Carol Swartz and Homer. With that said and done, I'm just going to shift over to the screen share and get underway. Let's see here, if you'll bear with me a moment. Okay. I titled it 3 Venues and 3 Experiments. The last couple of shows I had, in each of those, I used the shows as a way of refining some thoughts and approaches. Each of them had to do with just at least something that was different for me. And one that was in the UAA consortium gallery. My mistake, by the way, these are all 2021, not 2022. I got carried away with the change of the year. UAA Consortium Gallery, Kenai Peninsula College, Soldotna, Freeburg Gallery, and the gallery at the UAA Homer campus, all in late 2021. And in each of them, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through each of those exhibits in part, an edited down way. And the first approach is going to be what I was calling inversions, where I essentially used a not well known and pretty powerful alteration to the Lightroom tonal curve control to go and make some significant changes in the images, 90% of which were so gross that they offended the harmony of the universe, and I went and deleted them almost instantly for fear that the universe would be so offended that it would be unwilling to continue in its existence. So on the right is the original image. On the left is the inverted image. And down in the right corner inset of each is what I do with what happened with the tonal curve. And I'll show a quick example of that, I should say, a quick demonstration along the way. So on the right, we have the original photograph of white rocks with a standard medium contrast Lightroom tonal curve. On the left side was what happened when I ran the inversion. And you can see basically what we did was I took the darks and the lights and I ran them all the way to the top and then tended to pull the right side down or the middle down, resulting in a variety of somewhat unpredictable effects. And unpredictable as well was the effect of sliders. So it became very much an ad hoc experimental approach, but one which on occasion I thought produced some interesting results. So the next one, the bottom image, was a full color, although more or less black and white monochrome appearing photograph of a storm and Termagant Pass. And the top part was, as you can see, I did a direct linear inversion of the tones, which, by the way, also inverted the apparent color balance, going from a cool tone to a warm gray tone. I did not change the tonal quality. I did not make it a monochrome image. That's what happened when, as you can see, the tone curve is inserted on the lower right. Now, the top one actually appeals to me more than the bottom one. It tends to feel less distinct. And I won't say spooky, but very definitely not quite reality, which it's not. The bottom one, the next one, was a wet paper tablecloth at a Rotary end of year picnic, which I always kind of liked for its realistic but abstractness. And when I flipped it, as you can see, pulling the middle of the bar down toward the end, we got almost a solarization kind of image, but with a cool color tone to it. And then the next one was just one of the typical photographs so many of us tend to take of hoarfrost on trees along the Sterling Highway east of Soldotna. When I did the tonal image, as you can see on top of the inversion, and again pulled down more or less the middle, I got what almost seems to be a sepia tone and a near negative image of the two. As I say, these are done mostly for fun, but partly as an experiment to see what happens. I came across the effect of going to a linear contrast curve in Lightroom, and when I was tinkering with that, I came across the somewhat unusual effect of the tonal inversions. The bottom one is at the sculpture garden at the Seattle World's Fair, 64 World's Fair Space Needle sculpture garden. I think it was maybe 74 Space Needle. And this one was a rather more gentle one. Basically the dark, the bright parts went dark and the dark parts went light. I have not found a surefire way of predicting which ones seem to work and which ones are ghastly. I've tried to find some way of operationalizing the ones that seem to work, but I can't say I found one. Next one, bottom one, was this just winter sunlight coming into some art gallery sculpture supports, some pedestals. When I flipped it, it was just a straight linear flip. It went quite blue. It went almost to the complementary color. And of course, we have those standing out with the dark areas receding. Again, the sculpture curve, the tonal curve on top shows a direct linear progression without any alteration. The next one seems to be something that happens rather commonly, especially with seemingly near monochromatic, seemingly near mostly high-toned subjects. And that went from, again, hoarfrost on a Sitka rose hedge near the Veronica's coffee shop at the Kenai Bluff to something which frankly rather surprised me. And which personally I kind of liked in its own ethereal sort of way. The one on the left were icy rocks. They were salt spray, sea spray rocks coated with ice at the Homer Beach. And then on the left were what happens when I did the inversion. Now, I would say that most of the ones I did, I really didn't like. These are the ones that for just basically almost playful purposes, I found kind of work. I'm going to go and do a quick demonstration. So I got to stop that share and reshare my Lightroom screen. And here's what I just grabbed this one at random. This is just some early tulips in a vase. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to linear tone. I'm going to run the curve. Come on, run to the top. Thank you. Run that to the top. And then I'm going to first run that down one way. And, that's kind of interesting, in an abstractish kind of way. But when I go and pull the middle part down, you get all kinds of unusual things. I always, because it's very hard to revert to the original raw colors from here, it seems to stop before you get done tinkering. When I went back to the raw colors, I found that it was always better to make a virtual copy in Lightroom and then delete it. Should I not like what I got, which is most of the time. But anyway, so that's what happens with just going to a linear curve, going back to linear curves. I didn't know that. Just clicking back on linear takes us back to the original. Running it to the top, and then either pulling down the right side of the curve, which does a direct inversion, or going somewhere in between with some other sort of inversion and curve. Now, one thing I noticed is that when doing this, let me try to get up here a moment. When doing this, I found that the sliders, just for reference, the sliders don't necessarily always work the way we would expect them to. For example, increasing exposure on this tends to do strange things. It changes the color as well as the contrast. Reducing the exposure, this should be a -5 stop exposure change, but it actually runs to a high key image. So the sliders are sometimes, but not always consistent with what happens. Clarity seems to work normally. Exposure, colors, and vibrance do not. Anyway, so that was just a quick demonstration of that. I'm going to stop the share and go back to the PowerPoint. Close that off. Now, going down from there, the second was a series of exhibits over the last, most recently at the UAA in the fall 2021, For quite a number of years, I tended to write a thematic haiku, kind of conceive what I generally wanted the exhibit to be like, wrote a thematic haiku, and I've done haiku for a long time, and then go and try to find an optimum presentation, try to go and match or mesh the images so that the images I chose to present following the frame with the haiku would be kind of generally consistent with the mood that the mood or the overall gestalt, if you will, that I was trying to establish with the haiku. So for years, I would just have a frame with the haiku, and then I'd have 9 or 15 images that followed, hopefully that were at least reasonably consistent with each other. So I tend to write the haiku first, and then go and fit the images to it over a period of maybe a couple of months, leading up to the exhibit opening. More recently, I tried to go and do some sequences in which the haiku and multiple related images were all within the same frame. I tend to print with a 24-inch wide Epson 7900, more recently a 7570, much later generation. And so what I started doing is I start doing 24 by 36-inch sub exhibits, if you will, each of which contained its own haiku. And then I try to fit a number of images into that frame so that each of the framed sets was a sub exhibit with the haiku and multiple thematically related images. I was basically trying to recreate a variation on Minor White's series of sequences. Well, I had a lot of bumps along the way, some of which weren't very good. I'll show you my mistakes as well. But I think first what I'll do is I tried tinkering with optimum presentations, many images, one image, two images. And I felt that the overall presentation approach from UAA this last fall seemed to work the best to my way of thinking. And I recognize that everybody's mileage varies. But the way I ended up doing it was haiku +2. And I'll show you some examples. But first, I have to thank Steve Godfrey for his patience as I worked my way through a near disaster. My Epson 7900 printer failed in the middle of starting to print up the exhibit for the gallery there. It would not print a good red. Only the vivid magenta channel failed, but that was enough to mean that 80% of all the images I had chosen that had already fit together would not print properly. I ended up having to make lots of 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. experiments to find images which would print adequately without vivid magenta ink in the mix. That resulted in a lot of attempts to fit stuff that did not work because they just looked ugly without vivid magenta. I ended up having to buy a new printer because it was less expensive to buy 2-generation newer printer on sale last September than it was to buy the part and bring in the technician to fix the 7900. So that went off to an engineer's shop where all they needed were colored lines. They didn't care which color, even if they didn't have vivid magenta. And so the UAA exhibit was not only an attempt to find an optimum presentation, but an attempt to just find images that would print without vivid magenta. And it turned out that most of them were full RGB color images, but they tended toward appearing to be monochromatic, kind of a theory that I've tended to call not quite black and white. And so here they are, and I'll leave them on the screen a bit so that the haiku can be read as well. I won't read it because I'm not a poet. I'm not good at poetry reading. So we had a series of 7 panels, each of which had the haiku, and then ideally not only thematically related images that fit, but that would also print on my crippled printer. And what I found, at least that worked best for me, in the Western belief, the classic haiku, 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. That's not quite actually an accurate translation, but it works. And in this case, I felt that going with panels that were small sequences, 575 in the sense of the small haiku, a large key image, and then a smaller supporting image, I felt was ultimately the optimum presentation for this approach. Where the original notion of sequences is you grouped images together that were mutually supporting and helped reinforce each other to convey a meaning. Yeah, I felt that it worked best to do sequences within a single panel so that they're there with the haiku itself rather than broken up and scattered. So I'll just go through these. I'll leave them on there for 30 seconds or a minute so you can read them and kind of get the images. I will comment a bit about this one, about the images themselves in this one, however. The key image on the right, the big one, is actually a crop from a 5x7 film negative that I scanned. I use everything from micro 4/3 to 5x7 film. I shot this particular image many years ago. This is my deceased first wife. And we were in the middle of discussing a divorce at the time. And this, in fact, was a cold winter light. So this really was an image from a pretty chilly, emotional time as we were discussing divorce. The image on the lower left was one that I shot with an Olympus EP5, a pen camera. And I used that as the key image for an exhibit I did on the Dachau concentration camp, which we visited one time. And I felt that those kind of fit together. I won't spoil by telling you that well, maybe I will. That image on the lower left was actually a shop window at Nordstrom's with mannequins, how the light hit it one time. I did feel they fit together emotionally, even though one of them was, like I say, just the shadows of mannequins when Nordstrom was still open. Now, the image on the lower left is not a nude or anything like that. It's actually a waitress seen through the distortions of a glass brick wall at the cafe I used to frequent, which has since been demolished. They had glass brick walls up, and it did some wonderful distortions, which I used in an exhibit one time. And this was actually the distortion of the waitress in the food prep area in the back. Why it looks like a nude, I do not know. That's just what happened. That is as it came out of the camera. The other was when I was away at a conference one time, I woke up in the middle of the night with harsh sodium vapor lights coming through the window, and it just seemed to evoke a sense of aloneness, fitting with the haiku. both of those images, to me at least, evoke a sense of real loneliness and emptiness. The one on the right, the key image, actually should have been a little bit darker, but it needed to lighten up to see the screens. It is actually, the way I printed it was pretty much all dark in the background without any real tonal detail. Basically, I printed it so that the tonal detail in the background was down around a zone 1.5 or 2, for those of you who remember zone system. The one on the left was in my office in a late sunlight. For those of you who took the Eddie Soloway workshop from APC last year, I shot that as part of the Eddie Soloway, show and tell. I can actually see it here on the left here. It's just a little model airplane of a 1927 Curtiss Racer that my wife and kid bought for me one time, and I have here. But they somehow just, for me, evoke a real sense of aloneness and of emptiness. I should say emotional emptiness, lack of contact with people, which in a lot of ways was probably pretty fitting for the last 2 years of COVID, where we had so many of our bonds missing. The haiku in that case was actually occasioned by something I read about when Einstein, when the Nazis came to power, they put a hit contract out on Einstein, and he had to flee the country with just basically what he could pack in a suitcase along with his wife. And when he arrived in England at a safe place, at a safe, secure country home of a British aristocrat, they had a guest book. And when people sent in, they're asked to write their address. And Einstein wrote his name, A. Einstein, and then under address, he wrote Ohne Adressen, without address. And so this was sort of a riff on Einstein's basically lack of contact and homelessness after he fled a Nazi hit contract. The next one was essentially occasioned by the fact that both of these printed blue without needing a lot of vivid magenta from my crippled printer. And so it was an attempt to look at what I hope was the transcendence that sometimes occurs, the clarity that occurs when we are essentially doing winter here in Alaska or in others of the North Country. And finally, I did something on longing. Kind of the distortions of time and mist. Both of these photographs are exactly out of the camera. They are not manipulated. They aren't filtered or tinkered. The one on the left was actually what happens when you have a winter sunset being multiply reflected and transmitted light through 2 double pane glass windows set at a 90-degree angle to each other in the corner of a building, in this case, my law office. The other photograph was just a rainy windshield. The distortions there were of the rain. Basically, rain flowing down the windshield outside of one of those suite buildings off of 8th or 9th Avenue by the federal courthouse. Again, just a grab shot in each case, nothing distorted, but they seem to fit pretty well with the haiku that I'd been tinkering with for a long time. Now, for those of you who wonder where some of these haiku have come, at least 2 of them were inspired, this one as well, by some Guy Noir episode on Prairie Home Companion, which my wife and I always really enjoyed a great deal. So thanks to Guy Noir for at least inspiring some of these, despite multiple generations of transmutation. That's the end of that. That was the end of that. So basically, I was attempting to find the optimum presentation for a sequence plus haiku. And so there were some bumps along the way, and I'll go through my mistakes to trial and error very quickly. Too many images or too few images. And I basically was working with many of the same photographs, many of the same haiku in earlier, what I consider less successful exhibits. First one, too busy. A lot of the same images, but it was too busy. Or too few. They're just what it feels unbalanced to me. So these were too few. But we get back to the same basic approach and thought. And again, going back to the UAA exhibit, I was most comfortable with, 575, if you will, the haiku, a large key image, and a smaller secondary image. You remember some of these other ones. Same haiku, one of the same images, but too busy, can't focus. So 5 images was just way too many. On the other hand, I felt that 2 worked. It was just too cluttered. I was trying too hard, putting too much in. Again, too many images. I just felt that in trying to put in too much, I actually, less is more. Or I think was it Da Vinci said, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Same haiku, kind of the same thoughts. It just didn't work though. Now, here was one I thought worked a little bit better. This one was a single haiku, a single image. I like this one rather better, but that was the exception to the too many images or too few images and the sense of being unbalanced. Going back, I like, in a lot of ways, I like this one in terms of the loss the best of all. Then going back to the without address haiku, way too many images. And most of these are from the high plains of eastern Montana on US 2, the so-called High Line. Just way too much, I felt. But again, going back, I felt that 2 worked better. It felt more restful and more harmonious. Again, deep winter, same haiku. I try to work with more images. Too many images, too few images, in my opinion. This felt unbalanced. Almost felt like a motivational poster, which I hated in a way. Again, going back to the double images, which of the sort that the printer could do, that I could handle. Then going back, same haiku, some of the same images you've seen before. Again, one image in the same vein, it didn't work to my way of thinking as well as the same images going to 2. So the last thing I tried to do was in something different that I did last fall at an exhibit at Kenai Peninsula College in Homer. And I'm going to ask your indulgence. I decided to write it down a bit because I didn't want to stumble and take up as much time. And I call it Searching for Authenticity. This is my first attempt to address a longstanding personal question. Why do some photographs and other visual images linger in our memories, continuing to engage us and other viewers and resonate emotionally while other images fade away? What differentiates straightforward documentation or simple decoration from a work of art? Many would respond to both questions by citing a sense of emotional, quote, authenticity, close quote. We all make many images that are promptly deleted or hidden away. At least on the art side of photography, the images that we choose to exhibit are ideally a curatorial decision about the images that emotionally resonate most strongly with us as the photographer or with sophisticated viewers, as opposed to as yet another and unnaturally colorful software-enhanced sunset. In a recent exhibit at the Freeburg Gallery of Kenai Peninsula College, I made a first effort to identify some factors affecting what I think of as, quote, expressive authenticity, close quote. Broadly, I believe that it's the ability of an image to evoke some sort of real feeling, emotion, not only the image maker, but also in some other viewers, hopefully sophisticated ones. And I think that that tends to work by conveying an intuitive sense of real feeling, experiences, perceptions, and emotions, rather than contrivance or excessive intellectualization. You know, ideally, images facilitate viewers in vicariously experiencing some of their own, not only the image maker's own original experience and reaction to the subject when making them, even if some of the levels of that initial experience were not then obvious even to the photographer when the photograph was made, but also evoking something that's hardwired or wired, if you will, into the psyche of the viewer themselves. In a sense, we know from experience that even the most powerful images are essentially like Rorschach ink blots and will appeal only to a fraction of potential viewers. And whether someone reacts to a photograph or not probably results primarily from what that image triggers internally in a viewer or in ourselves. And we're all different. I recall Ansel Adams writing that he considered it a good year when he got 12 strong images that he considered worth exhibiting. Looking back at some of the images used in the haiku that I've just gone through and the sequences, some of those images are not quite F64 group sharp, yet I chose them for the images that were unmanipulated. You know, they were that way when I made the photographs. But some of those sharp images seem to particularly resonate with me and potentially other viewers. I did not include some of those in this section simply to avoid repetition. I did come up with some rough authenticity criteria that I use for curation at this point. And I can talk about those later, but I'll go through the images now rather than just talk too long. In a sense, what I was attempting to do, and please forgive me by using the term operationalize my curation criteria with an art group, but what I was trying to do was operationalize curation for exhibits for myself, and some practical considerations. I can talk about those later, but anyway, in the meantime, these are some of the other ones. And the way I decided to choose those were images which both resonated for me years later and were also chosen by a juror for an exhibit of a strongly curated show like Rarefied Light, Alaska Positive, or others. So I only chose images that were curated by somebody else and that resonate with me for a show. That's how I try to find the expressive authenticity side. And I will say for myself with this one reminds me of my dead father. It's an empty chair with just sidelight to it. This one, and if this is too bright, I apologize. I'm using a calibrated screen here. I don't know what other people might have. It could easily be too bright, but if it is, this was a foggy beach at Homer. This was in Alaska Positive some years back, as was this one. This may be too bright. The rocks have a real deep sense of dark tonal quality. This one was in the most recent Alaska Positive, and to me, it evoked a sense of serenity when we're out fishing in the fog. This was actually shot with lots of highway speed traffic whizzing by me as I was on the Kenai River Bridge in Cooper Landing and saw these drift fishermen. I ran back, parked my car, ran out, got a couple of shots. The fog parted, lifted about a minute later. This one is of a foggy day on Kenai Lake in the late fall. It's obviously cold in winter, but those big lakes don't freeze so quickly. And what this evokes in me are car tracks that just go down into the lake and they're gone. It evokes a sense of suicide to me, or somebody's suicide, just driving into the frigid lake. This one went with that summer visitor haiku that talked about a summer visitor staring into the darkness of her last journey. And in fact, this was the chair where that summer visitor was, up at the Midtown New Sagaya with their zinc walls. This was the chair where that aged summer visitor actually was sitting and staring into the darkness of her last journey. And so getting the photograph to pair with the haiku that it inspired, I suppose in a sense was a no-brainer. Again, I think on my screen it's looking too light. It should print a little bit, about one zone darker. Now, in that haiku pairing of Without Address, there was the image of a window that had two empty chairs and darkness around it. This is the same window, frozen with sunlight coming in, shadowing the tree branches. So it's a shadow tree branch. I'm sorry, shadowed single pane, condensed and frozen window. Again, nothing tinkered with, but it just evoked a sense of late cold winter to me. And I'm going to go down. This is the same window, but as spring is breaking, and it gives me a sense now of a bright, basically of hope and of spring breaking. It's the same window, different condensation patterns, but spring breaking. And as I say, all these are in jury shows of one sort or another. Going back, and this is probably the better order, this one was in rarefied light several years ago, and it was shot at, it was kind of very deliberately shot. I saw an employee at a restaurant moving around behind the rain pattern glass separator of the kitchen and the entryway. Another one of those distorted glass dividers at restaurants. But this one, struck me as being very shadowed and very, very ambiguous. And it evoked in me memories of my unfortunately deceased brother-in-law, who was openly gay, and he was a nurse. He was a wonderful, kind, nice person. And I termed it in memoriam, because in a way that it evoked a brother-in-law whom I dearly liked and was close to, who died too young. And it was kind of my memorial to him. Kind of shaded, kind of ambiguous, and we all miss him. So those are the ones that I went down. Oops, I was at the end. Those are the ones that I went down as evoking, being evocative, and having a sense of authenticity, at least to me. And they were in the Kenai Peninsula College exhibit of a short time ago. Actually, I think it came down for rarefied light to go up just a short time ago. If anyone, I'm open, I have some time, and trust me, never say, do you have anything else to say to a trial lawyer who is talking about his own photographic work and whose maternal side is Italian? It's not a good plan. But I don't have the kill switch on me, so I guess that we can get away with it after all. I'm open to thoughts and by all means suggestions and criticisms. Something, nothing talks to everybody. What may talk to one person or another, I am very much open to. I do have, and I did not say, what I decide were my operational curatorial criteria were. I can go over those if anybody wanted to, that I took away from that Searching for Authenticity exhibit. I'm open. Everybody seems to be stunned into silence. Even my
I'll jump
German,
in.
even my German Shepherd, who's sitting over there and is usually pretty, pretty vocal about everything. Even he seems to be stunned into silence in the background here.
I'll jump in.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Joe. That's it. That was great work. Lovely to see, and some truly, emotional images there. You pack a lot of, heart and meaning into those. So one thing that I saw that is kind of rare in photography is typography. And as a graphic designer, I'm, a big fan of type. I'm a typophile. I think
Okay.
people don't recognize the importance of typography, and I just wonder if in the images that you showed, some had just a little bit different type style, some had a little bit different type of handling, some were within a border, others without a border. Were you consciously tweaking and editing or not editing, but styling type, or were you going with just something else, some other motivation?
Well, the short answer is yes. I was experimenting and tinkering with stuff. Okay, I was experimenting and tinkering, but sometimes I also probably got a little bit distracted on occasion. The bordering on I tried to get rid of, the only time I really wanted to do the bordering was when an image had a faded to black background or a very dark background, and I try to do a medium gray thin border around it to give it definition, rather than have it floating out there into the black backgrounds I tend to prefer. Now, the thin borders around the haiku, I saw those in some cases. They should not have been there. If I was on top, what I usually would do is go in with with one of the editing tools in Lightroom and make those go away, and the print to file JPEG for when I would pull these together and print them as a custom package in Lightroom. So ordinarily, I would make the black border go away from the gray border go away from the haiku and let it just be there. And in the other cases, I would have to, with Lightroom, it's all or nothing. You got to print borders or not. I would definitely get rid of the borders when I could, because I'd used them originally. I found them distracting, as did a lot of other people. Celia Anderson pointed that out to me in particular. She used to teach at KPC. Most of you probably know Celia. She's a painter. And I took that to heart. But in some cases, in putting this together, when I pulled it off, I only noticed that I forgot to erase the border from some of the old JPEG files when it was too late to go and edit this PowerPoint tonight. So I'm sorry about that. On the typefaces, I found the typefaces I used in the one at UAA this last fall. That's how I much prefer to do it. I don't like fancy typefaces. I like something just very cold and crisp, or clear and crisp, I should say. Otherwise, I would only use borders around something where in the original fine print, you can see darker shades of gray. You can see zone 2, zone 3, and all that. But in the sRGB color space that shows on monitors and in JPEG files, you can't get those subtleties. So the border is there, but the subtleties are missing as well as the fine tonal gradation. When I do an exhibit, I always try to work with the light and the intensity and then match everything together. It's just harder to do that in a PowerPoint with going off to lots of different sRGB monitors and that aren't calibrated either. Can I answer one? I'm going to answer one. Oh God, it's a client. I'm going to put it away. There we go. Sorry about that. I'm obviously at my office. Jared said, you put a lot of emphasis on finding emotions in your photos. Why are emotions your prime directive in picking photos? I think it's the prime directive in most art, unless we're just doing illustration for a product or some such. Not to mention, originally training in something very technical like high energy physics, I tend to look at the flip side of my personality. You know, my day job is to be, oh, I'm using Windows 10, by the way. I'm using Windows 10. My day job as a trial lawyer forces me to become very, very focused upon detail and proof, which of course is consistent with, you know, training as a scientist originally. I like to point out that I spent many years teaching myself to become OCD because it's a survival skill for being a lawyer, but there's that other side to us as well. And so I tend to go and flip off to, try to tap into the emotional side in addition to that. It's just part of being a rounded person. And for what it's worth, when I was at MIT for my bachelor's and master's, they required 10 semester courses in 4 of calculus, 3 of physics, biology, chemistry, experimental design. But they required even more courses than that in art and music and creative writing and Shakespeare. And they were insistent upon, you know, nurturing the creative side of technical people. And they still do that. It's still the requirement now, for the stated reason that the intent was to go and train to not squelch people's creativity while still teaching them to do calculus and physics, because they wanted to train the creative scientists and engineers who would make tomorrow's breakthroughs. So that was a key criteria in training people back then, and even now. I still do the MIT admission interviews for much of Alaska and part of Southern California. And one of the things I always ask kids, and one of the things that really helps them, I think, on their admission applications, what do you do for art? What are you doing for learning about your inner self? I still do karate at 72. One of the things about karate is it tends to focus you internally and, you know, clear your mind and help you focus. These are all part of, I think, finding our complete self, rather than just our self that can do equations or try a case or do art one way or the other. And so that's one reason I try to operationalize, if you will, find practical criteria for curation. And ultimately the one that seems to come down to finding real, you know, for finding art, if you will, is to, you know, to look for, you know, something that evokes real, you know, honest emotion, rather than, you know, pretense or whatever else. Anyway, so that's my take.
Joe, the involvement of emotion in your picture seems to harken back to the teachings of Minor White. Do you still find yourself influenced by that experience?
Yeah, but it took 40 years for the influence to come back out, come to the fore again. Not 40, well, that's an exaggeration, 35. It took about 35 years for the Minor White part to come back in. I'll tell you a short story, if you don't mind spending an extra minute or two. And it's a joke on me. It was something kind of dumb I did myself. I was taking a class. I was in a class there one time, and this was a class where a lot of students from Wellesley, which has a close relationship with MIT, very, very close Wellesley-MIT relationship. You know, cross-registration classes, you know, you could go to Wellesley and also get a joint degree with MIT and all that stuff. Well, there are a lot of Wellesley young women in this class back in the day when there were virtually no women at MIT. This is like the late 60s, early 70s. I'm going back for my 50th reunion, if that helps date me, okay, this year. And so here's this one young woman I was really kind of hoping to date, feeling rather like that bleak, empty window without any human contact at the moment myself. And she's going on, she has this very amorphous photograph. It was really Minor Whitish to an extreme. And she goes on talking about how this photograph exemplifies the energy of the cosmos. And I blurted out, oh, bullshit. And in the middle of it, with the great man himself and all the women sitting there, I just blurted it out. Trust me. I still remember that day and that reaction. So I'm probably a little bit kinder in my comments to people than boarding out, oh, bullshit, to something else, probably a little bit overly intellectualized and pretentious. I think that it's just necessary to avoid the overly intellectualized and pretentious part of it. And it's really easy for us to get into all of that ourselves. I find myself, we all, I think, certainly myself, I shouldn't generalize to other people, battle our own egos, and that's going to be a struggle for this whole lifetime and maybe more to come for all we know.
Hey, Joe, this is Johanna. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to say, I thought it was an amazing presentation and your images are gorgeous. I
Thank
really
you.
connected to the whole emotive, thematic points that you were making, and the light was beautiful. And yeah, it was lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I would say that probably the third section about all the bumps in the road and all my mistakes were in some ways the most illuminating for me, because it took me a while to get there. I almost gave up until finally the UAA one finally worked. I felt it worked for me as well as it was going to work. I couldn't, I really couldn't come up with much else at that point.
I got one more question.
Sure, Matt.
So it seems like most of your photos are you just have a camera, you're walking around, you're living your life, and you see something and you capture it. Is that a broad brush assessment, or are you more analytical?
It's a very accurate assessment, because that's basically what I do. However, the two are not diametrically opposed. I also work with the 5x7 film camera. I work with the view camera quite a bit. I do a lot of large format film work, both, starting to go back into color as well as black and white, a little bit of 4x5. But at the same time, I'm carrying my Olympus Pen F with me, my little Micro Four Thirds Pen F. It's just the right job for the right tool for the right time. Realistically, there are a lot of things that I think work best with a spontaneous shot with something like a Pen F or even a full frame Pentax like I use. And there are other times when stepping back and being a little bit quieter, slower, and more contemplative kind of works as well. It's not all one or all the other, but I would say the majority is kind of the spontaneous shot where I have a camera in the car, but at the same time going back to large format, which I did a lot of, also tends to reinforce the careful work habits as well on occasion. And it really is a good way to point out all of your sloppy. Boy, when technique is sloppy, it really shows up in large format.
All right, thanks, Joe. A lot of activity in chat.
Oh, let me take a look here. Yeah, a lot of people seem to like the Kenai Lake photo, and I've always liked it too. And
Joe,
yeah,
I just want, what's really interesting, I've seen your images over the years, is Petra. And what I really enjoyed in this talk today is to get an idea of where your images come from. We see each other's photographs, if we're lucky enough, in rarefied light or in Alaska Positive, or maybe every now and again in an exhibit at a gallery in the state. But most of us don't really know where those images come from, where the thought process was, and how, over time, maybe our photography changes. And I really enjoyed you talking about your work, being honest, where you feel your weaknesses were, or where you felt there was room for improvement, and showing those, what you called your mishaps, And I think that's just really generous of you. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Mishaps they're always a popular subject for all of us, you know. I mean, it just works. Somebody asked me, what camera did I use for the photo on the left? I can't answer the question because the photos aren't up anymore. And I apologize for that, but I would say that the bulk of them are micro four thirds cameras, mostly Olympus, Pen F, EM5, partly because they're the camera I always have with me. And quite frankly, if you're careful with them and you're using better lenses, I like to use primes. They're good enough for a 24 by 32 print at practical viewing distances. Some of them are, you know, a few of them were full frame, and some of it was 5x7 film scanned. I don't really get off on being in the darkroom anymore. I like to develop my film, turn on the light, and then go and scan the stuff and fix it digitally. I have neither the patience nor the eye nor the manual dexterity to spot prints and negatives forever. I just can't take spotting prints and negatives. So I scan my large format stuff and go and then just print it digitally. Although granted, you know, it may not be quite as perfect as a really perfect black and white gelatin print, but so be it. It's there. Trying to think where I'm heading off to next. My next little thing is to start taking the 5x7 monochrome images and color images and scanning them as transparencies so that they are scanned in as inversions directly. So I'll be scanning in really high resolution. And by the way, it's a little known fact that a lot of lenses that work on 5x7, for example, are just as sharp as a 35 millimeter or a sub full frame images. They were made for professionals. They're diffraction limited. So when you're basically going and taking a 35 square inch negative, you can get incredible detail with the right kind of film. But I'm scanning those, and I'm scanning them in as negative images. So I'm sorry, as a positive. So they're already coming in as a negative. And then I'm starting to work with them a little bit along the way of those inversions early on, but with different tonal qualities. And I'm starting to practice. I'm starting to look at different approaches to digitally printing them to try to get closer to the sense of a really finely made gelatin print, which so far seems to suggest using a very high gloss paper. I classically used a high luster paper from Red River, but I'm looking now at high gloss, a very high gloss paper with a metallic background. So it's not the aluminum metallic prints, but just a little more reflectance to the base to get a brighter white, if you will. Let's see what else.
Although I will just say, yeah, I've always enjoyed your images, and I sure agree with the other folks who said some of these images that I've seen before, it really is good to get a little insight into how you made them, where you made them, what your thinking process was, etc. So yeah, great stuff.
You tended to see very direct images, I think, because those are the ones that seem to get chosen for rarefied light by the juror more often than some of the other ones that I presented tonight. Hey, it's the juror. Some things work for some people and other things work for other people. It's fine. But that may be one. A lot of these have been submitted, but not necessarily chosen. So be it. Well, probably time to pull the plug. I think people are signing off. And thank you. I thank you guys for the opportunity. It's really appreciated.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks.
All right.
It's been great.
Great to see you.
Thank you. Thank
Good night,
you.
everyone.
It was great.
Thanks a lot. Bye.